America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jordan Bruno, vice president at Job Creators Network.
You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. Today, we're joined by Nick Begich. He's the Republican candidate for Congress in Alaska. Nick is an Alaskan businessman and staunch American First conservative. He's here to talk about the critical importance of developing Alaska's natural resources to ensure energy independence. Could a Harris-Walz administration mean further restrictions for Alaska and energy dependence on China? Well, we'll find out today. Nick, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate all the work that you do every day to promote small businesses and the importance of small business in our nation.
Yeah, well, we really feel like they are the backbone of America. There's 33 million small businesses in this country. They employ 60 million people. So, I mean, these policies can kill our small businesses or really help them. And when you've got pro-business, low taxes, low regulations, small businesses can really excel. So, I mean, tell us about yourself. I know you're a small business owner. You're running for Congress for the Republican seat in Alaska. Tell us about yourself, your business, and what made you decide to run for office.
Yeah, so my name's Nick Begich. I'm up here in the Great White North of Alaska. I am a small business owner. My background is in business. I got an undergraduate degree in business with a focus in entrepreneurship from Baylor University. And I'll date myself. It was back in 1999. And worked for a little while in investor relations for a publicly traded company. And interestingly enough, I asked my girlfriend's dad if we could get married, and he said, not until you have a master's degree. So I went back to school.
Wow.
Yeah, went back to school and got an MBA with a focus in information technology and decision sciences. And from there, worked at Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan as a global technology manager, and also in the car group there. And I was told at the time, hey, we're going to give you the minivan, or rather the Mustang line, and they gave me minivans instead. So I learned a lot about minivans. And worked in the design studio, saw the Mustang from across the way, but it was a lot of fun. But decided, I didn't love that city. I was from Alaska originally, and I wanted to move back. And I did move back, my wife and I, to Alaska about 20 years ago. And I started a small business shortly after returning to Alaska with a credit card and a folding table and a laptop that I bought at Costco, and I said, let's see if I can start a software company, and that's what we did. And I bootstrapped that software company up to about 150 people across 3 countries, and the company was really focused on helping startups. And so I've spent most of my career helping companies start at the PowerPoint deck stage, right? Just that early ideation stage, and move them from that idea, that concept, to a product, to finding customers, to locating the necessary funding to finance the growth of their companies. And as part of that process, what we did, we kind of had a hybrid model where we help companies build the software or the technology components of their business, but I also would often take equity stakes in those startups. And so we were able to build a portfolio of investments alongside these entrepreneurs, working next to them, taking that founder's common equity and helping them to build their businesses. And that process helped to jumpstart hundreds of companies across the United States, creating thousands of jobs across the United States. And it was a way for us to be alongside the entrepreneur as we were building their business together.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you're hearing from Alaskans that they're facing now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So many times when I'm traveling the state of Alaska, I'm hearing from people telling me that life has just gotten too expensive. The cost of living has gotten too high. People, it's no longer just simply an inconvenience, right? It's not that, I can't go out 2 times a week. I got to go out one. No, people are getting 2 and 3 jobs. They're worried about their future. They're going into debt just to meet everyday expenses, just to meet the requirements of everyday life. And, this is not the America that I grew up in. It's certainly not the America that I want for my 12-year-old son as he gets older. We need a nation that works for everybody. And, this rising cost equation that has been brought to us by the Harris-Biden administration has to end. We've got to have more money in the pockets for families and the ability for people who want to start a small business to be able to do that. I've been involved in this space for over 20 years. I know how hard it is already to start a company. Most of the entrepreneurs that I've worked with over the last 20 years, when they start a business, they're doing it from their living room. They're trying to find time between jobs and obligations at home to dedicate to that business. And it's gotten harder to do that over the last 4 years. We need to make sure that people have the opportunity to see their dreams fulfilled. And in order to do that, the cost of living has got to come down.
No kidding. Nick, I really appreciate that pro-growth message that you gave at the outset there about how you're helping small businesses grow and succeed. I think that's the type of positive, uniting message that conservatives on our side really needs to make to bring people together and get people on our side. What policies are your campaign or Republicans in general offering that can help accelerate that small business opportunity and growth?
It's so important that we have a favorable tax climate. I think that's number one. And that tax climate relates directly to entrepreneurs, but also the people who invest in early stage businesses. So often a company will gain some of those early traction points with their customer base. They'll start to prove that they've got a product. And then the next challenge is, how do I scale what I know is working about my company up to the next level? And oftentimes, you can't bootstrap that next phase. It requires additional capital investment coming from the private sector. And what we've seen from the Harris proposals is a dramatic increase. She would like to dramatically increase the capital gains tax rate. She would like to dramatically increase taxes across the board, even wealth taxes that are confiscatory in nature. And this makes it much harder for the investment community to put that money at risk in early stage startups when they know that the capital gains tax rate will be much higher. So we need to make sure that we preserve the Trump tax cuts. Those need to be renewed. There's a lot of high quality tax incentives that were included in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from President Trump. Things like the 179 deduction, accelerated depreciation for capital investment as well. Those are important provisions because they allow the investment community to invest in riskier investments. And those typically are the earliest stage investments that you'll see over a company's life cycle.
Interesting. Yeah, we do a lot of work on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, making the case for it because we hear so often from our Main Street small businesses how much they appreciate the provisions and how worried they are that it's going to expire at the end of next year. So what policies are your opponent and Democrats in Congress and the Harris administration, how have they made life harder for small businesses and ordinary folks in Alaska?
Up here, we're a resource state. So, when you think about Alaska, and we refer to the rest of the United States, contiguous United States, as the lower 48. So when you're in the lower 48, you think about Alaska, a lot of times you think about this pristine wilderness that would be fun to visit one time. Maybe you've heard a story about a neighbor or a friend, or maybe you've had an opportunity to go on a cruise or visit the state. Most of the time, 99% of the time, people can't wait to come back. But for the people who live here, we're a resource-based economy. So whether that's oil and gas, mineral development in the form of critical minerals or base metals, precious metals, rare earths, even in Alaska, we provide 60% of the nation's seafood in Alaska. It won't surprise anyone to know we have more trees than any other state in the country. So timber has the potential to be a tremendously strong industry in our state. So we're a resource state. But the challenge that we have in Alaska right now is that Joe Biden and his administration have issued 66 executive orders and actions targeting just Alaska's ability to develop resources and to access the resources that we have, whether that be with roads or ports or other infrastructure. And so the Harris-Biden regime has had it out for my state. And so a lot of the small businesses that exist in Alaska, they're either directly connected to the resource industry in some way, or they're tangentially connected. So when you think about any economy, you got to remember that there are primary dollars and secondary dollars. And those primary dollars for us are the resources that we develop. So when those dollars come into our state of Alaska for primary resources in the form of oil and gas or minerals or these other industries, they then have an opportunity to circulate to the gas stations and the grocery stores and the restaurants and all the other service businesses that support these industries. If we lose primary dollars, if we lose primary industry in our state, this whole state's private economy collapses. And that's an example, just one example of what's happening across the country with the Harris-Biden regime. These are people who don't come from the private sector. They have not worked in a regular job. They come from government almost exclusively. And so these people truly don't understand the benefits that are provided by small businesses to everyday people across our country.
Nick, I worked in the auto industry as well. I worked for Chrysler for about 12 years or so. And they were Chrysler and then Daimler Chrysler while I was there. And so I understand a lot about, Michigan and the auto industry and the impact on jobs as a whole. But what we've seen on the energy side is a big push, an EV mandate to move the auto industry towards EVs and away from gas, cars that use gas, combustion engines. Talk to us about that EV mandate and how you see the auto industry reacting to it, and of course the impact of economically for a mandate like that on the country as a whole.
It's a great question. Look, I think we need to first start with the idea that this new set of technology it's often billed as clean tech, and I will tell you that it's no more clean than any other tech. The amount of mining that goes into producing these vehicles is absolutely tremendous. You got to move a lot of earth. So I think that's a misnomer that the public typically has when it comes to electric vehicles. Look, at the end of the day, the consumer needs to be the one to decide whether they want an electric vehicle or a gas-powered vehicle or a hybrid of the two. And when government steps in and says, you will use this type of vehicle, we will mandate the transition to electric vehicles, they're pushing a solution on the consumer that what we see in the market is that the consumer does not actually want. There are a portion of new vehicle purchasers that want an electric vehicle. That's great. They should be able to buy one. But for the rest of the nation who says, I'm not sure that's the right solution for me, they shouldn't be required to buy that vehicle. And again, this gets back to that base philosophy of today's left Democrat Party. And I want to say it's not all Democrats, but it's the left part of that party that sort of hijacked that party. And they want to tell us how to live our lives. But the truth of the matter is the consumer is the ultimate decider. And they're going to go out and say, look, I got an F-250. Maybe I want to keep that diesel-powered F-250 because it does a job that an electric vehicle can't do. Or maybe what we've seen in some of these emergencies throughout the nation is that when the electric grid gets turned off, you've got to have a true source of power that you can rely upon in those situations, right? So I think we need to make sure that the regulatory environment provides for maximum choice for consumers. And I think anytime you see the government step in and say, you will use this technology or you will not use this solution, negative consequences ensue. And we've certainly seen that with the auto industry. Ford Motor Company, as I mentioned, I worked there coming out of grad school, and it was a great company. And it is a great company. It's an American icon. But these companies, they look at the regulatory environment. They can't make a vehicle in 12 months. To transition over to an electric vehicle assembly line takes years, potentially a decade, to retool and re-educate your workforce and find all the supplier relationships in order to do that. And so when the government steps in and they says, we are making this change, it forces all industry, big and small, to pivot their entire supply chain and try to address the new requirements that are being handed down. When the consumer doesn't follow, who's left holding the bag? Well, it's the private industry. Government's not bailing these companies out. They're on their own. And so when you see Ford Motor Company, for example, losing billions and billions of dollars trying to keep up with government mandates that the consumer doesn't want, it's bad for everybody.
Absolutely. The current administration has taken, from what I've read, about 250 actions to make it more expensive to produce energy in general, obviously lending itself to driving up the cost of everything. I know we've seen the rate of inflation come down from historic highs, but the cost, the price of everything, price levels remain exceptionally high for Americans. Talk to us about how those types of actions, what would your approach be to sort of undoing some of those actions that the administration has taken to help unleash domestic energy production and bring down the cost of life?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, they've got to relax regulations on natural gas and other traditional sources of energy. Look, here in my state, in Alaska, the Biden administration stepped in on day one, and said that they would restrict drilling in the 1002 area of Anwar. And, they do this out of an ostensible desire to preserve the environment. That's what they shop to people when they take these actions. They say, well, we're trying to protect the environment. Well, the reality is they're not trying to protect the environment, because when they take away jurisdictions like Alaska, which has the most responsible record of resource development, not just in the country, but worldwide, and they say, we're going to take this venue offline, what they're actually telling the public is we're going to push those jobs, that economic base and those resources to places like China, like Afghanistan, like Iran, adversarial jurisdictions that don't have our best interest in mind and certainly do not have strong environmental development records. And so oftentimes you'll hear folks say, hey, from the left saying, hey, it's about the environment. It's not about the environment. In fact, if you cared about the environment, you would demand that work, that resource development work, be done in the most responsible jurisdictions possible and done in jurisdictions where you could actually observe what was happening. And that is the United States, and specifically that's Alaska. And so they take these actions, and they don't make a whole lot of sense. But what needs to happen is we need a Congress. We need a Congress that is willing to put into law the right for our states to produce the resources that our nation needs. What you see every time a new president gets seated from one party or another is that pendulum swing, right? So when Trump comes into office, he says, let's unleash American energy. Let's achieve energy dominance, right? And that's a great strategy, and we are 100% supportive of it. But the next time a Democrat gets into office, their president says, we're shutting all this off. What we need is the Congress to pass laws and that get signed into law when President Trump wins and is seated in 2025. We need to make sure that those rights are encoded in law so it's more difficult for the next president to step in and by fiat change from his or her desk the national environment for resource development. So that's really important because it allows us to achieve a permanent fix to this recurring problem that we've had.
Yeah, I don't know how any Alaskan could vote against that. That sounds like a pretty compelling message to me. Let me switch gears for a second. There's another question facing voters in Alaska on this year's ballot. It's to get rid of ranked choice voting. Could you explain ranked choice voting and why it's a warning to all of us in the lower 48 about what may be coming our way?
Absolutely. So ranked choice voting, for those who don't know, let me just give a quick synopsis of it. It's this idea that you can choose which candidates you'd like to see win in a particular order. So you might say, okay, I like candidate A more than candidate B, so they're going to get my first place vote. Candidate B gets my second place vote. And in Alaska, we have 4 candidates, regardless of party, that advance into the general election. And so there could be a mix of Republicans, a mix of Democrats, independents. You could have 3 Republicans and an independent, or 2 Democrats, 1 Republican and independent. So it's independent of party. It's an open primary. You vote for one person in the primary, and the top 4 advance into the general. In the general, you rank your candidates in order of preference. Now, the problem of, among many, one of the main problems of ranked choice voting is that it turns out that 30% of voters on any side of the aisle have chosen not to rank a second choice. Okay, so imagine this. You say, you know what? I like this Republican. I don't like this other Republican as much, and I'm going to choose to rank just one. Well, if your first choice doesn't advance in a subsequent round of counting, your ballot stops counting. And so this is how we ended up in Alaska electing a Democrat in the last election cycle in 2022, because a good chunk of the Republican voters out there decided they wouldn't rank a second choice. And so the system can be gamed, and it rewards the party with the most party discipline as a result. And so what we have seen this cycle here in 2024, 2 years later, is that the Republicans, myself and the other Republicans on the ballot, said, look, whoever finishes first in the primary is going to stay in the race and the others will get out. And that's what we did. And it gives us the best opportunity to restore a Republican seat in what is a Republican state. Now, ranked choice voting is being propagated throughout the nation. There's a number of states that are talking about doing it. There's a number of states actually that have outlawed ranked choice voting by legislative action here in the last couple of years, because they saw what a problem it was in Alaska for us. There's a ballot opportunity to repeal ranked choice voting here this year. And by all accounts, by every poll I've seen so far, the people of Alaska want to repeal ranked choice voting and return to our traditional voting methods. And they're doing that because they've seen it in action. It's not a good system, and it results in additional gamesmanship. One more thing I want to mention about ranked choice voting. I call it delayed primary, because in the past, you would figure out who your party's nominee was going to be. You have an opportunity to come together and then contrast the policies of one side of the aisle with the other and let the voters decide. Well, you don't have that with ranked choice voting, because if you've got more than one candidate representing a party in the race all the way to the general election, what you'll find is that instead of moderating politics, which is what it's advertised to do, it makes politics even more polarizing than it already is, because you've got 2 people on one side of the aisle duking it out for who's the most conservative, or duking it out for who's the most progressive on the other side. And so it actually ends up polarizing the electorate even further. So again, it's simply not what it's billed to be. It does not achieve the objectives that it's advertised to achieve. And I would recommend anyone listening to this podcast today, if you see ranked choice voting coming up as a topic in your state, I would strongly advise you to do everything you can to avoid it.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, it's a liberal front to elect Democrats. Have I read it right that you would already be in office if it weren't for ranked choice voting?
Well, you know, it's interesting because in ranked choice voting, there is a circumstance where in a head-to-head, in a head-to-head environment, you can end up winning races that you wouldn't have, that you can't win in a ranked choice environment. So what we saw in the special election, we had a special election in 2022 against the Democrat. I would have beaten her by 5 in a head-to-head. Against the other Republican, I would have beaten her by 20 in a head-to-head. But because I couldn't get into that second place slot, missed it by a couple percentage points, we ended up electing a Democrat. And it's one of the structural sort of mathematical loopholes or failures of ranked choice voting that it allows for that. And again, it's another reason why we really don't want to see ranked choice voting anywhere, whether it's a Democrat state or a Republican state or an independent state, because the purpose of an election should be to elect the person who best reflects the electorate. And when you have a system that doesn't do that, well, you need to change it. Because again, we're trying to represent the voters. And if the system that we have doesn't represent the voters, it's a bad system.
Nick, tell our audience where they can go to find out more information about you and to support your campaign.
Yeah, so my campaign is all about the people. We reach out directly to people on social media, on X, on Facebook. So if you're on social media and you're on X or Facebook, come out, be a part of the conversation. It's very important that your voice be heard. Our website is Alaskans for nickbegich.com. That's NickBegich, Alaskans for nickbegich.com. There's information about other policies, things we haven't talked about today. But importantly, right, the left donates like it's religion to their political candidates. And we need support both in-state and from around the country. This is the number one flip opportunity for Republicans. The number one seat in the country is in Alaska. So if you're thinking about where can you make an impact, donating to my race will make an impact and help us to ensure that we retain control of the House and give President Trump the majority that he needs in order to move national priorities through the Congress to his desk so they can be signed into law.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we wish you the best of luck in your race. Thank you for joining us on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. Thank you all for tuning in to listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday, and you can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. And we'll be back soon with another episode.